It is really the kindest thing, Rosalind, that you understand Gabriel and I simply fell in love, and one cannot help these things," said her sister Diana, turning before the glass in the betrothal gown that should have been Rosalind's, and the Duke of Estcourt, standing unseen in the doorway of the morning room, went very still. He had come to Marrow Hall to end an engagement, though not the one everyone believed. Gabriel, 5th Duke of Estcourt, had been betrothed these 6 months to the elder Marrow daughter, a match arranged between fathers, as such things were, when Rosalind was scarcely more than a girl, and he a young man newly come into his title. He had met her exactly twice in those 6 months, both times briefly, both times among crowds, and he carried away from those meetings only a vague impression of a quiet, dark-haired girl who watched more than she spoke and had, the one time he had made her laugh, a laugh so sudden and warm that it had stayed with him for weeks afterward in a way he had not troubled to examine. What Gabriel did not yet fully understand, standing frozen in the doorway, was the thing that the whole of Marrow Hall had spent the past month quietly arranging behind his back. The younger sister, Diana, golden, dazzling, and accustomed to having whatever her sister had, only better, had decided that she would rather be a duchess than let the plain elder girl become one. And Diana had a genius for getting what she wanted. She had worked upon their father, who had always favored her. She had worked upon the neighborhood, so that a story began to travel that the Duke's true affection had settled upon the younger Miss Marrow. And she had worked in her absence upon the very idea of Gabriel himself, spinning for anyone who would listen a romance between herself and the Duke that had never happened. A romance she now spoke of as established fact, as she stood turning before the glass in the gown that had been made for Rosalind's betrothal ball, altered overnight to fit Diana's smaller waist. For the plan was nearly complete. That very evening at the betrothal ball at Marrow Hall, it was to be announced with the connivance of the girl's father, who had been persuaded that a duke would obviously prefer the beauty, that there had been an adjustment, that the Duke of Estcourt would, after all, marry Diana. And Rosalind, the jilted elder sister, would stand at her own betrothal ball and watch her younger sister take her place, her future and her name in the announcement, and would be expected to smile and be gracious and pretend, before the whole county, that she did not mind. Gabriel understood all of this in the space of perhaps 90 seconds, standing unnoticed in the doorway, listening to Diana instruct the maid on how the altered gown should be pinned. He understood it, and a cold fury rose in him such as he had not felt in years, not at being maneuvered, though he was being maneuvered shamelessly, but at the casual cruelty of it, at the way Diana spoke of her own sister's dispossession as the kindest thing, at the fact that somewhere in this house was a girl who was about to be publicly humiliated at what should have been the happiest occasion of her life, and that no one in her own family had lifted a finger to prevent it, and that several of them had actively contrived it. He went to find Rosalind. He found her after some searching, not weeping in her room as he had half feared, but in the long gallery at the top of the house, standing at a window that looked over the park, very straight, very quiet, watching the carriages of the early guests begin to arrive on the drive below. She did not hear him come in. And so for a moment Gabriel simply stood and looked at her, the plain, dark-haired girl he had met twice and dismissed twice, and saw, for the first time, what he had been too careless to see before. She was not plain at all. She had a fine, grave face, and a way of holding herself that spoke of a dignity hard won and closely kept, and when she turned at last and saw him standing there, her dark eyes held not tears but a kind of steady, exhausted acceptance that struck him harder than any weeping could have done. It was the face of a person who has been overlooked her whole life and has stopped expecting otherwise, and is bracing, now, to be overlooked one final and public time. "Your Grace," Rosalind said. She curtsied. "You should not be up here. The ball will begin soon, and I think there is to be an announcement. My father will wish you downstairs for it." A small pause, and then, with a courage that cost her visibly, "I know what the announcement is to be. You need not look uncomfortable. Diana will make you a far more brilliant duchess than I ever could, and I bear neither of you any ill will. I only ask, and I ask it as the one favor of this whole affair, that you let me leave before it is said. I do not think I can stand in the room and hear it. That is all. That is the only thing I want." Gabriel looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Marrow," he said, "may I ask you something, and will you answer it honestly, however it reflects upon your family? Did you agree to this? Did anyone ask you whether you wish to be set aside for your sister?" Rosalind's composure flickered. "It does not matter whether I—" "It matters to me. Answer the question." "No," she said very low. "No one asked me. I learned of it a week ago by overhearing it, as I imagine you have just now done. I have not been consulted, I have only been informed." Her chin came up. "But it is done, your grace. My father has decided, Diana has decided, the county already believes it. There is no use in—" "There is a very great use in it," said the Duke of Estcourt, "as you will shortly see. Go and dress, Miss Marrow. Wear whatever you please, not the gown they have altered, something of your own. And come down to the ball, and do not leave before the announcement whatever you have promised yourself. I ask this of you now as the one favor of the whole affair." He held her startled gaze, and something in his cold face had caught fire. "Trust me until midnight. That is all I ask. Only until midnight." And he bowed, and left her staring after him in the long gallery, and went down to the ball with the whole shape of the evening rearranged in his mind. He had an hour before the ball, and Gabriel spent it not in the company of his host, as courtesy demanded, but walking the grounds of Marrow Hall alone, thinking. He was not, he admitted to himself, a man who had given much thought to feeling. He had come into his dukedom at 23, upon his father's sudden death, and had spent the years since learning to carry its weight, the estates, the tenants, the seat in the lords, the 1,000 demands that fell upon a young duke with no one to share them. He had married no one because there had been no time, and had let his father's arrangement with Sir Hugh Marrow stand because it was convenient and honorable and required nothing of him but a signature and, eventually, a wedding. He had thought of Rosalind Marrow in the abstract as a duty he would discharge in due course. He was ashamed of that now. For as he walked, he found that he could remember, with a sudden and unsettling clarity, both of the 2 brief times he had met her. The first had been at a crowded reception, where she had said almost nothing, and he had thought her dull, and had been relieved when the evening ended. But the second had been at a dinner, and he had been seated near her, and some pompous baronet had been holding forth at length on the natural inferiority of the female understanding, and Gabriel had watched the quiet dark-haired girl beside him listen with perfect composure, and then, when the baronet paused for breath, demolish his entire argument in 3 sentences so precise and so devastating that the man had never recovered his footing for the rest of the meal. And she had done it without raising her voice, without heat, with a small dry gravity, and then catching Gabriel's startled eye, she had laughed, just once, a sudden warm laugh quickly stifled as though she had surprised herself by forgetting to be invisible, and that laugh had stayed with him. He had thought of it unaccountably for weeks. He had told himself it meant nothing. It had not meant nothing. He understood that now, walking the darkening grounds. He had met twice a woman of rare and quiet quality, and had been too preoccupied with the weight of his own consequence to see her, and had very nearly let a scheming beauty and a weak father hand her sister his name while the true woman stood aside, and let it happen out of a dignity so complete it had looked, to careless eyes, like meekness. It was not meekness. He had seen her face in the gallery. It was the discipline of a person who has been overlooked so long that she has made a kind of armor of her own composure, and it had cost her more than tears ever could. The injustice of it worked in him as he walked and hardened into resolve. He would not merely refuse to be party to the cruelty. Any decent man would refuse that. He would do more. He would undo it publicly and completely in the very room and at the very hour it had been designed to happen, so that no one in that county could ever again pretend that Rosalind Marrow had been anything but chosen. He owed her that. He had been careless with her, and carelessness, he was learning, could be its own kind of cruelty, quieter than Diana's, but a cousin to it. He turned back toward the house, where the windows had begun to blaze with the light of the gathering ball, and he thought of the quiet woman in the gallery who had asked, as the one favor of the whole affair, only to be allowed to leave before her heart was broken in public. And he thought, no, not leave, stay, and be chosen. That is the favor I will do you, whether you have asked it or not." What he could not yet know, what would take the slow weeks of courtship to teach him, was that in resolving to rescue Rosalind Marrow's dignity, he was about to lose his own heart entirely, and that it would be the best bargain he ever made. The ballroom at Marrow Hall was ablaze that night, and the whole county had come to see the Duke of Estcourt betrothed, though a good half of them had come expecting a surprise, for Diana's careful whispers had done their work, and everyone now understood that the announcement might not name the sister the settlements did. Gabriel moved through it all with a composure that gave nothing away. He greeted the girl's father, Sir Hugh Marrow, with a coolness the older man was too pleased with himself to notice. He allowed Diana to attach herself to his arm, radiant and triumphant in the altered gown, and to lead him about the room as though the thing were already settled, presenting him to this neighbor and that as if she were mistress of the occasion. He let her. He said little. He was watching the door. And at last Rosalind came in. She had done as he asked. She had not worn the altered gown. She wore instead a simple gown of deep blue silk, unfashionable perhaps, but her own, with her dark hair dressed plainly and a single strand of her late mother's pearls at her throat. She came in quietly, alone, and took a place near the wall where the overlooked and the unwanted always take their places. And she did not look at the Duke, and she did not look at her sister, and she held herself very straight and prepared, Gabriel could see, to endure. Diana saw her and smiled, a small, private, triumphant smile, and squeezed the Duke's arm and murmured, "Poor Rosalind. She does try. Shall we have the announcement soon, Your Grace? Papa is so eager." "Very soon," said Gabriel. Sir Hugh Marrow called the room to attention. The music stopped. The 400 candles burned, and the crystal drops of the chandelier threw their light across 400 faces, turned expectantly toward the dais where the Duke of Estcourt stood, with the beautiful younger Miss Marrow glowing upon his arm, and the plain elder Miss Marrow standing forgotten by the wall. "My friends," said Sir Hugh, expansive and delighted, "you all know why we are gathered. It is my very great honor to announce the betrothal of my daughter, of the Duke of Estcourt to my daughter." "Allow me," said Gabriel. He said it quietly, but it cut across the room, and Sir Hugh, startled, fell silent and gestured for the Duke to continue, plainly assuming his Grace wished to make the announcement himself. Diana's hand tightened on his arm in pleased anticipation. Gabriel stepped forward to the edge of the dais. He detached Diana's hand from his arm gently but definitely and set it aside, and she blinked up at him in the first faint stirring of confusion. He looked out over the room, over the 400 waiting faces, and then his gaze traveled the length of the ballroom, past the beauty at his side, past Sir Hugh, past the whole assembled county, to the woman standing quiet and braced by the far wall. "I came to Marrow Hall," said the Duke of Estcourt in a voice that carried to every corner, "betrothed to a lady, by an arrangement made some years ago between her father and mine. In the months since, I confess I have been a careless suitor. I met my betrothed but twice, paid her little attention, and allowed a great many people to persuade themselves, and try to persuade me, that my affections had settled elsewhere." He let that hang in the silent room. "I have discovered today the full shape of what was being arranged in this house. I have discovered that I was to stand upon this dais tonight and announce a betrothal to a lady I never courted, at the expense of the lady to whom I was pledged, and that the pledged lady, who did nothing to deserve it, was to be set aside and publicly shamed at her own betrothal ball, for the crime of being less dazzling than her sister. I find I will not do it." The room had gone utterly silent. Diana's face had drained of all its color. Sir Hugh's mouth hung open. "I have been careless," Gabriel went on, "but I am not a fool and I am not a coward, and I will not be made the instrument of a cruelty against the one person in this whole affair who has behaved throughout with perfect honor." And then he did the thing that Marrow Hall and the county and Rosalind Marrow herself would remember for the rest of their lives. He stepped down from the dais. He walked the length of the silent ballroom, past the 400 staring faces, past his own abandoned betrothal party, straight to the woman by the wall. And he stopped before her, and he bowed low, formal, complete, and he said, in a voice pitched to fill the room, Miss Rosalind Marrow, you are the lady to whom I am pledged and the only lady in this house I would have. I have been slow to see it, and I ask your pardon for it before all these people. Will you do me the very great honor freely of your own will, and not because any father or sister has arranged it, of becoming my wife and my duchess? I ask nothing but your own true answer. If it is no, I will leave this house tonight and trouble you no further. But I could not let another minute pass, or another word be spoken, without saying your name, and no one else's before the whole of this room. Rosalind Marrow stared up at him. The steady, exhausted acceptance had gone out of her face, and in its place was something Gabriel had seen only once before, the day he had accidentally made her laugh, a sudden, disbelieving warmth, breaking across her grave features like sun across water. Behind him, somewhere in the frozen room, Diana made a small, strangled sound. "You said my name," Rosalind whispered. "I did," said Gabriel, "and I mean to go on saying it. Will you have me?" Rosalind began and stopped, because 400 people were watching, and because the enormity of what was happening had stolen her voice. And then she looked at the Duke of Estcourt's grave, intent face, and she found her courage, the courage that had carried her through a lifetime of being the overlooked one, and she said, clearly enough for the room to hear, "I hardly know you, your grace. 2 meetings and a bow do not make a marriage. If you are doing this only to punish my sister, or to right a wrong, I would not have it. I have been an instrument in this house long enough, and I will not be an instrument of your chivalry too." A murmur ran through the room. It was not the answer anyone had expected. Gabriel felt something in his chest lift, fierce and glad, because it was exactly the answer he should have known she would give, the answer of a woman who would not be chosen out of pity any more than she would be set aside out of preference. "You are quite right," he said, and he did not lower his voice, for he found he wanted the whole county to hear this too. "It is not enough. 2 meetings and a bow are not a marriage, so I will ask you differently. I do not ask you to marry me tonight. I ask you to let me court you truly, properly, as I should have done from the first for as long as you require, with no announcement, no arrangement, no pressure from anyone in this house or out of it. I ask only that you give me the chance I threw away through my own carelessness. And if, at the end of it, you find you cannot love me, you have only to say so, and I will go, and your name will never be spoken by me again save with respect. That is my offer. It is a poor exchange for the humiliation you were nearly dealt tonight. But it is honest, and it is freely made, and it is yours." Rosalind Marrow looked at him for a long moment, and then slowly she smiled, the sudden warm smile he had been unable to forget, and she said, "That, your grace, I will accept. You may court me. We shall see whether you are as good at it as you are at ruining betrothal balls." And a ripple of startled, delighted laughter went through the room, and the terrible frozen silence broke, and the betrothal ball of Marrow Hall became, against all design, the scene of the most romantic thing the county had witnessed in a generation. The courtship that followed was the making of them both. Gabriel came to Marrow Hall not as a duke collecting a bride, but as a suitor with everything to prove, and he proved it. He learned Rosalind slowly, in long walks in the park and long talks in the drawing-room with the door properly open, and every hour of it taught him how nearly he had thrown away the best thing that would ever be offered him. He learned that she had spent her whole life in her sister's dazzling shadow, managing the household her father neglected, comforting the servants Diana bullied, expecting nothing and receiving less, and that she had built out of all that overlooking not bitterness but a deep, quiet, unshowy strength. He learned that she read history and argued politics better than most men in Parliament. He learned that her sudden warm laugh, the one that had haunted him, came rarely and had to be earned, and he set himself to earning it and counted each one a victory. And Rosalind, for her part, learned that the cold, careless duke of her arrangement was neither cold nor careless once a person troubled to know him, that he had been raised to a title too young and had armored himself in reserve, and that beneath the armor was a man of deep feeling and dry wit and a fierce, unexpected tenderness that he turned now entirely upon her. She had been overlooked her whole life. Gabriel looked at her as though she were the only thing in any room worth looking at, and he did it not once at a ball for effect, but every day, quietly, when no one was watching, which she came to understand was the only kind of looking that counts. But the making of them was not without one last trial, and it came, as trouble in that family always came, from Diana. Watching her sister's slow ascent into happiness with a fury she could barely contain, Diana made one last attempt to poison it. She could not reach the Duke, he had made his indifference to her plain, and so she reached for Rosalind instead, and she chose her weapon with a cruel accuracy that only a sister could manage. She came to Rosalind's room one evening, all false concern, and sat upon the bed as they had used to sit as girls, and said gently that she only spoke out of love, that she could not bear to see Rosalind hurt. Did she not see that the Duke's attentions were guilt, not love? That a proud man, having been shown to have nearly wronged her, was now overcorrecting, playing the devoted suitor to salve his own conscience and to punish Diana, and that once the county had forgotten the scandal he would cool, and Rosalind would find herself married to a man who had chosen her as a gesture, and would spend their whole life quietly regretting it. "I would not marry a man for those reasons, dearest," Diana murmured. "I would rather be overlooked forever than be a duke's act of penance. But then, you were always braver about being overlooked than I could ever be." It was masterfully done. It found every fear Rosalind had ever harbored and gave them a voice, and Rosalind, who had spent her whole life being the one passed over, and who had scarcely dared to believe her sudden happiness was real, lay awake all that night with her sister's poison working in her, and by morning had half convinced herself of it, that she was a gesture, that she was penance. That the Duke of Estcourt, so kind, so attentive, would wake one day and find himself shackled to the plain sister he had chosen in a fit of chivalry, and would be too honorable ever to say so, and that she would spend her life watching him not quite regret her, which was a fate worse than any public shaming. So when Gabriel came the next day, she met him gravely, and told him, as she had once tried to tell him in the ballroom, that she thought perhaps they should not go on, that she would always be grateful for what he had done, but that she could not marry a man out of his guilt, and could not bear the thought of being a kindness he had done and could not undo, and that she released him freely, so that he need feel no obligation. Gabriel listened to the whole of it in silence, and then instead of protesting, he did a thing that surprised her. He laughed, not unkindly, but with a kind of rueful wonder, and said, "Your sister has been to see you. I can hear her in every word. She always did know exactly where to put the knife." He took Rosalind's hands, which she had not the will to pull away. "Rosalind, listen to me. If I had chosen you out of guilt, I would have made the grand gesture in the ballroom and been done, announced the betrothal that night, married you in a month, discharged my honorable debt, and congratulated myself. That is what a man acting from guilt does. He acts fast and publicly and gets it over. Instead, I asked to court you. I asked for no announcement and no arrangement, and however long you required, and I have spent these weeks walking your father's dull park and arguing with you about the corn laws and working like a scholar to earn one of your laughs, and I have been happier doing it than I have been in the whole of my careful, consequential life. That is not penance, Rosalind. Penance is not happy. That is a man in love, doing the slow, patient work of it because the woman was worth doing it properly for. Your sister cannot imagine it because she has never in her life valued anything she had to earn. But I am not your sister, and I am not going anywhere." Rosalind looked at him, and the poison of the long night began slowly to lose its hold. "You work to earn my laughs," she repeated. "I keep a private count," said Gabriel gravely. "I am at 11. I mean to make it 11,000. I cannot do that if you release me, so I must decline to be released. You will simply have to bear being loved on purpose and at length and for no reason but yourself. I am sorry. I know it is not what you are used to. You will grow accustomed to it in time." And Rosalind Marrow, who had been braced her whole life to be overlooked, and had been handed instead a man who counted her laughs, put her face against his shoulder and let herself, at last, believe it. And Diana's last poison died there, in the quiet drawing-room, unable to survive contact with a love that was simply, patiently, unmistakably true. After that there was nothing Diana could do, though she tried once more. At a county assembly some weeks later, she appeared at the Duke's elbow in her finest gown with her brightest smile, making one final bid for the notice she believed her beauty entitled her to. Gabriel looked at her with a cool courtesy that was worse than any anger and said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Miss Diana, how well you look. You will forgive me, I am engaged for every dance this evening to your sister, and mean to remain so for, I should think, the rest of my life." And he bowed and turned back to Rosalind and left Diana standing alone with her brilliant, useless smile. It was noticed, and it was repeated, and Diana's carefully built reputation as the beauty who had nearly caught a duke curdled over the following season into the far less flattering truth that she was the sister who had tried to steal another woman's betrothed at her own ball and had been publicly, completely, and deservedly passed over. She married in the end a dull country squire and lived out her days in the modest circumstances she had schemed so hard to escape, and it was said, though never at Estcourt, that the sight of her sister's happiness was the one dish she could never quite digest. Sir Hugh Marrow, who had connived at his elder daughter's dispossession, found the Duke of Estcourt a cold and distant son-in-law thereafter, correct in every particular, generous to Rosalind, and utterly without warmth toward the man who had been willing to shame her. It was punishment enough, and Gabriel never troubled to make it more. They were married in the high summer at Estcourt, and Rosalind walked to him down the long aisle in a gown that was entirely her own, chosen and made for her and altered for no one. And the county came in its hundreds to see the plain elder Marrow girl become the Duchess of Estcourt, the girl who had been meant to stand by a wall and watch her future given to her sister, and who instead had heard a duke cross a crowded ballroom and speak her name, and no one else's, before all the world. She did not tremble as she walked. She had done all her trembling long ago, in a gallery window bracing to be overlooked. There was no need for it now. At the end of the aisle stood a man who had crossed a whole ballroom to reach her once, and would go on crossing every room there was for the rest of his life to reach her again. Gabriel never forgot the sight of her by that wall, braced to be overlooked one final time. He kept it as a private warning against his own younger carelessness, and against the ease with which the world overlooks the quiet and the good in favor of the dazzling and the loud. He kept his private count of her laughs, too, all his life, and passed 11,000 somewhere in their middle years, and did not stop. And at every ball they ever attended, he made a point of the same small thing. When the room was full and the music playing and 100 brilliant people vying for the Duke of Estcourt's notice, he would cross the whole length of it, past all of them to wherever his wife stood, and offer her his hand and dance with her first, so that no one, least of all Rosalind herself, could ever again be in the smallest doubt as to whose name the Duke of Estcourt would always and only speak.